Hello and welcome to the Dumbbell Ben podcast. I'm Dumbbell Ben, as I'm known on TikTok as well. Feel free to follow me over there. I just post clips about these studies as well as about my general training, improvements that I'm making. I'm right now trying to do a front lever, really far away from it, probably months if not years away from it, but I post updates on that as well as, advice, tips, comments on other people's, replies to other people's TikTok. So feel free to follow me over there. Here at Dumbbell Ben, we're trying to do a podcast that hopefully gets us a little bit closer to the research for health and fitness. I just review studies and do an in-depth analysis on their methods, their backgrounds, what type of mistakes I think they could have fixed in order to make the study more valuable and more accurate as far as what we're trying to test and what results we should take out of it. Now, the study we're going to do today is effects of whey protein and pea protein supplementation on post-eccentric exercise muscle damage, a randomized trial. Now, this is just one study, which means you can't make a solid conclusion on if pea protein or whey protein is better for recovery of eccentric muscle damage, but it'll just give us a little bit of a clue, helps us look a little bit further. And of course, I'll be doing more studies on this and everything else moving forward, so make sure to subscribe. Let's get into it. So, this study, they were specifically looking at the pea protein because pea protein has a high leucine content, high for some of the vegan proteins. Vegan proteins tend to be a little bit lower in leucine, a lot of them. Pea protein is one of the ones touted as being high in leucine content, which is one of the stimulators for muscle protein synthesis. Of course, muscle protein synthesis is one of the main things that we study in order to see if something has a positive effect on muscle growth. It's an acute measurement, so it doesn't always pan out that if we have acute muscle protein synthesis spikes, that many of those will add up into a growth of muscle over the long run, but it often is the case. So it's kind of a snapshot that we look at. If you go in here to their methods of how they actually did the study, you'll see that they used individuals who are not regularly engaged in resistance training, individuals that were ages 18 through 55 who were male. Now, in many studies, you'll see that you want trained individuals when you're looking at outcomes resulting from training. In this one, they actually on purposely found individuals who were not regularly resistance training. The reason why this is better in this situation is because they're looking specifically to see the effects that protein might have in attenuating muscle damage, and it becomes very hard to elicit large amounts of muscle damage in people that are well trained, especially if they were doing eccentric type training, which is what they're using here. They're told to avoid protein outside of the prescribed dosage, as well as supplements in general. And of course, this would hopefully avoid muddying the waters by having perhaps a person who is taking pea protein also take a casein protein isolate before bed or something like that. Now, an interesting part of the study is most people who are interested in pea protein or soy protein or any of the alternate proteins besides whey are probably either vegan or vegetarian and are looking to see if these proteins are as good as whey in eliciting muscle growth and muscle protein synthesis. The problem here is that the individuals who were in the pea protein feeding group were not vegans or vegetarians. They were just individuals eating a normal diet. So their normal diet probably included quite a bit of protein in it already. In fact, they discussed this later on in the study that the total protein was probably much greater than the actual protein you need for normal muscle protein turnover and synthesis for muscle protein synthesis. So this study doesn't actually show if a vegan diet or plant-based protein would be as good for building muscle. It simply shows that the supplementation of a vegan or a non-vegan protein on top of a normal diet is or is not equivalent. So let's look a little bit further into the study. So what they did is they took participants and they put them through an eccentric exercise program in order to elicit muscle damage. Before and after that program, they took measures of muscle strength, they took measures of muscle soreness, and they were trying to see if the supplementation of the pea protein or the whey protein, both during that initial session as well as afterwards for 5 consecutive days, would cause any differences in muscle recovery from that session. So they had one heavy overloading session, mainly eccentric movements, which are shown to cause the most muscle damage. If the pea protein or the whey protein would cause different effects in that recovery over the next 5 days. So recovery is judged by a couple things. The biggest part of recovery is showing a return to previous performance. However, soreness as well as other blood markers are also part of recovery, and those were measured as well. So we'll get into those results in a second. Of course, here, physical activity was not measured, neither with diet during the 5 days. With longer studies, I actually usually don't look into diet as much with these types of studies if diet's not the intervention. And the reason is because food logs and such are pretty inaccurate, and so it's often much ado about nothing. In this one, I think it would have been nice because it's such a short study that if one individual happened to have a really long hike that week, it could have impaired recovery to a large degree, and then you have a huge variance, a huge outlier that pulls the numbers in a certain direction. Now, if you're going for a longer time, a lot of those individual variables will tend to get leveled out with just the sheer volume of data. Here, of course, they did have a pretty big sample size of 92 individuals, which does help to reduce that randomness in the study results. So, back to the protein feedings. What they did is they had the individuals consume 0.3 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight 3 times daily, either soy protein or whey protein, every day of those 5 days. So on the initial day where they had the training bout, they had the participants consume the 3 protein boluses, each one consisting of 0.3 grams per kilogram of body weight, and on each of the following days. Of course, in total, that's 0.9 grams per kilogram of body weight, which in and of itself is a pretty substantial protein intake. You add that to their basal protein intake that they're already taking with their diet, and you'll probably end up with more protein than you would need for muscle protein synthesis. So all the athletes were theoretically supplied with enough protein to power muscle protein synthesis as well as muscle growth and recovery and all that other stuff. Now, what they were theorizing is that because pea protein and whey protein are both high in leucine, both would show similar amounts of recovery for the individuals involved. Here they quote another study that recommends 700 to 3,000 milligrams of leucine in order to reach a threshold that will enhance recovery over the next 5 days. Now, I could go a little bit more into how the methods were set up, but let's go ahead and go into the results. There's a lot in this one, so I want to get into them. Now, if you look at this graph, serum creatine kinase increased in every group over the course of the 5 days. However, this increase was attenuated in both groups, both the pea protein group and the whey protein group. Serum creatine kinase is a biomarker showing that the body is still recovering and under inflammation. So attenuation of this biomarker shows the whey protein as well as the pea protein group were probably experiencing enhanced recovery from that supplementation, as opposed to the control group. However, the statistical significance of the attenuation was only seen in the whey protein group, essentially showing that both groups tended to increase recovery, but the whey protein group tended to increase it even more to a statistically significant amount. If you look at one other study here, they also looked at blood serum myoglobulin, and here a similar pattern is shown where all groups tend to increase, but the increase is attenuated to a significant amount with the whey protein and not with the pea protein. It is only attenuated to an insignificant amount. So based on those two biomarkers, those are biomarkers of recovery and inflammation still processing in the body. It seems to be showing that the pea protein, while it does help, it doesn't help to as significant as a measure as the whey protein. So as far as those biomarkers go, it would seem the whey protein is better for recovery. However, if you looked here, the effect size was large when comparing whey protein on water groups for creatine kinase and myoglobulin after 3 and 4 days of recovery from the Monday exercise session. Ingestion of pea protein isolate had a smaller effect, and when compared to water, no significant differences were found, with small to medium effect sizes. The no group differences were found when comparing the pea and whey protein groups. Now, the interesting thing is there were other markers that showed benefits for the pea protein group. Most of the blood markers were better for whey protein, but most of the performance markers and soreness levels were better for the pea protein group. There's a graph here you can see if you're looking on visual. I will have this up audio though soon. So I'll try and give you a detailed explanation of this graph. And there was a time treatment interaction only for the pea protein group where they actually increased their vertical jump over the course of the study, showing they had better recovery. There was also a time treatment interaction between pea protein and the bench press where they actually increased their repetitions on average in the bench press over the course of the 5-day study. There was also a time interaction between the pea protein group with an increase in peak power output in the Wingate model. There was also a Wingate mean power increase in the pea protein group, and also a decrease in delayed onset muscle soreness as compared to water. Now, to be clear, there was a significant treatment interaction, which means that the pea protein group in all of those measures showed improvement over just drinking water. It didn't show improvement necessarily over whey protein. So what that means is both whey protein and pea protein showed improvements, but only pea proteins were significant, which is the exact opposite of the blood biomarkers. The blood biomarkers showed improvement in both situations, but only whey protein reached significance. So this is something really interesting because in the conclusions of the study, it doesn't address the soreness or the repetition strength really at all. They pretty much just drop those out of the conversation and focus on the blood biomarkers. They say, taken together, these data support the strategy of using 0.3 grams per kilogram doses per day of whey protein isolate during several days of recovery from intensive eccentric-based exercise to reduce serum levels of muscle damage biomarkers in untrained males. Supplementation with pea protein compared to water had an intermediate but not significant effect, with no differences being found between pea and whey protein. So, they only talk about biomarkers in order to enhance recovery. So why did they do all of the testing of the muscular strength, the muscular soreness? They then continue to say, the whey protein supplements had no influence on DOMS or exercise performance despite the lowering effect on serum muscle damage biomarkers, a finding that has been reported in similar investigations. Thus, exercise-induced leakage of muscle proteins such as creatine kinase, myoglobin, and LDH has not been strongly or consistently correlated with muscle performance and soreness. In general, future studies should consider using leucine-fortified pea protein isolate supplements or greater dose volumes to match the leucine and BCA profile of whey protein isolate. Post-exercise mitigation of serum muscle damage biomarkers may be similar between whey and pea protein supplement groups in comparison to water when leucine and BCAA intake levels are comparable. So, it seems like here that the researchers were wanting to reach a conclusion. Their data was a little bit confounding. They couldn't really accept or reject the hypothesis they had made. And while they ended up rejecting their hypothesis being that pea protein would be the same as whey protein as far as effective recovery, they couldn't necessarily either accept or reject it because the data was conflicting. Now, at the end of the day, it's much ado about nothing. You know, there's benefits and downfalls to both sides, and looks like that's what the study showed. We'll continue to look further. Pea protein versus whey protein is still a little bit in its infancy, as whey protein has been around for much, much longer. But yeah, continue to check back. I'll try to get more studies regarding this topic. A little bit of a quick one today, but make sure to keep checking back. I'll be trying to get you more studies about this topic and other topics. Later I'll be doing an episode on foam rolling, which of course has gained almost a cult following, but we'll be looking at its real effects on strength as well as on mobility. So tune in for that. Make sure to follow on my TikTok at dumbbell_Ben. And tune in next time. Glad you're here. Let me know what other studies you want to see down in the comments below.